He hit my shoulder like a man shoving through a turnstile, and I want you to understand that I felt every ounce of it and gave him nothing. People think the bearskin is the hard part of standing a royal post. It isn't. The hard part is a stranger driving his shoulder into yours hard enough to rock your heels off the line, and you keeping your eyes forward, your jaw closed, your breath even, while a part of you that was a soldier long before it was an ornament wants to set him on the stone and explain the rules. "I'm on the list," he said, to no one, to everyone, to the rope I was standing behind. "I am literally on the list. I will call him the guest, because that is what he was supposed to be, and because the man's actual name went around the world for 3 days after this, and I have no wish to give it another mile." He came up the Cordon line at the Avonholt forecourt, the way water comes up a drain it has decided to ignore. There were perhaps 400 ordinary people pressed along that velvet rope that morning, families who had stood since before dawn, an old man with a folding stool, 2 sisters who had taken a coach overnight to see the Founders' Day procession. The barrier was a simple thing: brass stanchions, a doubled crimson rope, a painted line on the cobbles, and me. Me and the rope were the entire difference between the public and the cleared ground, where the household company would form up. He decided the rope did not apply to him, and he decided I was furniture. "Front row," he said, snapping his fingers near my face close enough that I felt the small wind of it. "I need front. I'm meant to be inside the cordon. Move the rope." I did not move the rope. I am not permitted to move the rope, and even if I were, I would not have moved it for a man who had just shouldered an old woman's grandson out of his place to reach me. Behind that unmoving face, and you should know that face costs more than people imagine, I was already counting the steps to the duty corporal at the corner, counting the seconds until the company marched and this man's window to make a fool of himself closed. Counting, because counting is what you do instead of the thing your hands want to do. He took my silence as a malfunction. That is the thing about a certain kind of man. He does not hear no. He hears a machine that has failed to give him yes, and he starts looking for the button. "Are you deaf?" He leaned in. The crowd had gone the particular quiet of people who can smell that something is about to tip. Phones came up along the rope. I could see them in the bottom of my vision, a little forest of black glass rising. I said, "I'm on the list. Do you know who arranged my invitation?" "Do you?" I knew exactly who had arranged his invitation, as it happened, though I had no way to say so and no reason to. The Founders' Day list is the household's business, and I am the household's wall, and a wall does not gossip about its blueprints. What I knew, what I had been taught in a harder place than this forecourt, was that a man who keeps saying he is on the list is usually a man who has just discovered that the list does not care. He put both hands on the brass stanchion to my left and shook it. The rope bounced. A woman near the front gasped and pulled her son back by the collar. The stanchion is heavier than it looks. He did not move it far, but he moved it, and the moving of it was the first real wrong of the morning. Up to then he had been rude. A rope is for ordinary people, and a shoved shoulder is an insult a man swallows. But a hand on the barrier is a hand on the household's order, and the household's order was, that morning, my single responsibility on this earth. I let my eyes come off the middle distance for exactly 1 second and find his. I want to be careful here because this is the part people get wrong when they tell this story back to me. I did not glare at him. A glare is a thing you do when you have lost. I simply looked at him the way you look at a road you are about to cross, measuring it, and then I returned my eyes to the front. 1 second, maybe less, but he felt it. I watched him feel it. For just a flicker, the bluster behind his face went out like a struck match in wind, and underneath it I saw the thing that lives under most bullies. A small, anxious man who had spent his whole life being let through, and who had just touched, for the first time, a door that would not open. Then the match relit. They always relight. He turned to the crowd, to the phones, and spread his arms. "This is unbelievable," he announced. "I'm a guest of the house. This person won't let me to my own seat." He said person the way other men say obstacle. "Somebody film this. I want this on record. I want his number." "I have a number. It is sewn inside the collar of my tunic, and it belongs to the regiment, not to him, and he was never going to have it." But I felt the morning narrowing now to the thing I had hoped to avoid. The procession would step off in under 3 minutes. If he was still hanging on the barrier when the household company wheeled into the forecourt, he would be a hazard, not just a nuisance. And a hazard at a royal ceremony is not a thing the institution treats gently, no matter whose list he claimed. He must have read something in the set of my shoulders, because he laughed, a short, ugly bark, and did the one thing I had been counting on him not to be stupid enough to do. He ducked the rope. He went under it the way a child goes under a fence, one shoulder dipping, one expensive shoe coming down on the painted line, then over it, onto the cleared cobbles where no member of the public was permitted to stand. The crowd made a sound, not a cheer, not a gasp, something in between, the sound 400 people make when a man does the forbidden thing right in front of them. He straightened up on my side of the barrier, brushed his sleeve, and grinned at me as if he had won. "There," he said, "now move." Behind my face I stopped counting. The window had not closed, it had been kicked open from the inside. Every drill I had ever sweated through told me the same calm thing, and it was not the thing he expected, and it was not the thing the phones were hoping for. It was simpler than that, and it was final, and the whole of the next half hour, the ejection, the ban, the way his own face was played back to him until he could not look at it, all of it turned on what I did in the next 4 seconds, which was almost nothing at all. I keyed the small switch at my collar, the one I am never to use except for exactly this, and into the channel that runs to the duty corporal, and beyond him to a great many people this man had never imagined. I said 5 words in a voice I kept perfectly level. "Barrier breach, forecourt. 1 subject." Then I put my eyes back on the front, squared my heels on the line, and waited for the household to do what the household does, which is the part of this story he had never once stopped to consider, because men like him never do. You should understand what a barrier breach means at a state ceremony, because he did not, and his ignorance is most of the reason this ended the way it did. The crimson rope is not decoration. It is the visible edge of a thing that runs deep, a zone, a plan, a set of standing orders that everyone wearing the household's colors has rehearsed until it lives in the body. The moment my 5 words went out, that machine began to turn. It does not turn loudly. It turns the way a tide turns, and by the time you notice the water has moved, your shoes are already wet. He did not notice. He was busy with me. "I don't think you understand who I am," he said, planting himself square in front of me on the cleared stone. Up close I could smell expensive cologne and cheap nerves. "I've got 100,000 people who follow everything I do. You touch me, you so much as breathe on me, and you'll be the most hated man in this country by lunch. So move the rope, let my people through, and we'll forget this happened." His people. I let my gaze stay at the front, where the great archway under the clock tower stood empty and waiting, and I said nothing, and the saying of nothing was the loudest thing I could have done. A reply is a transaction. It tells the other man you are both in the same shop, haggling. Silence tells him there is no shop. There is only the wall, and the wall has already made its single call, and the wall is not negotiating the terms of its own existence with a man who ducked a rope. He waved a hand in front of my eyes. I did not blink. I have not blinked at a hand in front of my eyes since a sergeant with a face like a brick taught me, years and a war ago, that the flinch is the only thing the other man is really fishing for. Give him the flinch and you have given him the whole conversation. Withhold it and he is left shouting at a statue, which, and the phones along the rope were learning this in real time, makes the shouter, not the statue, look like the fool. I want to be honest with you about what restraint actually costs, because people watch a clip like that and think the guardsman feels nothing, and that is exactly backwards. I felt a great deal. I felt the print of his shoulder still sitting in mine where he had hit me. I felt the wasp prick of his finger on the brass and the heat coming up the back of my neck. That is the body's oldest argument, the one that says you do not have to take this, the one that men carried out of caves. I felt, underneath all of it, the particular insult of being called a toy by a man who had never in his soft life stood a single hour where standing might cost him something. And I held every ounce of it behind a face that gave him a flat gray nothing, and I will tell you that holding it took more out of me than the worst march I ever made. That is the trade. The stillness people admire is not the absence of the storm. It is the storm contained, and the containing is the whole of the work. There is a trick to it, and the sergeant gave me that too. You do not empty your mind. An empty mind cracks. You fill it. You give it a task small enough to hold and large enough to matter. So while the guests jabbed and shouted and played to the phones, I was running the forecourt in my head the way I had been trained to run a far more dangerous ground. Where the duty corporal was, where the stewards would come from, how many seconds until the company stepped off, which way the crowd would move if it had to move, where the families with the small ones were standing so that whatever happened, it would not happen toward them. He thought I was ignoring him. I was doing my actual job, which had nothing to do with him at all, and that, though he could not have known it, was the deepest cut I could have dealt him. To a man who needs to be the center of every room, being genuinely, professionally irrelevant is a wound that does not close. From the corner of my eye, I saw the duty corporal step out from the stanchion at the far end of the cordon. He did not run. We do not run. Running tells 400 phones that something is wrong, and nothing was wrong, something was merely being corrected. He came up the inside of the line at a brisk, even pace, a young man named Hans with a steadiness past his years, and behind him, peeling off the colonnade where I had not even registered them standing, came two of the plainclothes household stewards in their dark coats, the ones the public never looks at twice, because the public is busy looking at the bearskins. The guest's back was to all of it. He was still performing for the crowd. I want his name and his number, he was saying, jabbing a finger toward my chest without quite daring to touch it. I want a supervisor. I want. Sir, Corporal Hans's voice was quiet and entirely without heat. You're inside a restricted cordon at a state ceremony. I need you to step back behind the rope. Now, please. The guest rounded on him, delighted to have found a button at last, a human one that talked. Finally, yes, thank you, now, this, he flung an arm at me, this one won't let me to my reserved place. I am a guest of the house. Check the list. Go on, check it. I don't need to check the list, sir, Hans said. You crossed a marked barrier onto cleared ground. That's the only fact that matters right now. Step back. Last time I'll ask politely. And here the guest made his second great mistake of the morning, which was to believe that politeness is the same thing as weakness. He had spent a life among people whose courtesy was a thing you could push, who said please when they meant please don't make me call someone. He heard Corporal Hans say please and he thought he had found give. He hadn't. There is no give in that please. It is the last rung of a ladder, and the rungs below it are not polite at all. Or what? The guest said, and he laughed again, and he reached out and put one finger flat on the front of my tunic, on the brass, on the household's brass, as if to push me, as if a push from him could move a man whose whole training is to not be moved. You'll have your toy soldier here arrest me. I felt the finger. I felt it the way you feel a wasp land on the back of your hand, a small pressure that your whole body is suddenly organized around. And I did nothing, because doing nothing was the order and the discipline and, frankly, the cruelest thing available to me, since the longer I did nothing the more clearly 400 phones recorded a grown man laying hands on a motionless guardsman at a ceremony for the public's enjoyment. But Corporal Hans had stopped saying please. Right, Hans said, and the dark coats closed in from either side, unhurried, practiced. a hand at each of the guests' elbows before the man had finished his laugh. "You've put hands on a guardsman on his post. You're done here. Get off me, do you know who I'm on the list?" "You keep saying that," Hans said, and for the first time there was the faintest edge of something human in his voice, something almost like pity. "It doesn't mean what you think it means." They did not wrench him. That is worth saying, because the version of this that went around later kept wanting it to be rough, and it wasn't. The household does not give a man like that the gift of being roughed up, because rough is a story he can sell. "See what they did to me." Instead, they simply contained him, two steady men and an immovable third, and they began to walk him back toward the rope, and the gap in it the crowd was already instinctively opening. He twisted. He pulled. He appealed to the phones. "Are you getting this? Are you all getting this?" And the phones were, the phones were getting all of it, but not the thing he wanted them to get. Not a brave man standing up to a faceless system. A loud man being walked off the field he had walked onto uninvited, narrating his own removal, getting smaller with every step. I stayed on the line. My part was almost over. But there is a thing that happens at the exact moment a man like that realizes the door is truly, finally closing on him. A thing I have seen on a parade ground, and on a far worse ground than this. The moment the bluster collapses and the fury rushes in to fill the hole where it was. I heard it before I saw it. I heard him stop appealing to the crowd, stop saying "list," and draw a breath that had nothing left in it but spite. And then he said the thing that turned his bad morning into a catastrophe that followed him for the rest of the year. The thing the household had been quietly hoping, for his own sake, that he would have the wit not to say. He spat. Not at me. I want to be precise, because the precision is the whole story. He did not even have the discipline to spit at the man he hated. He twisted in the steward's grip and turned his head toward the crowd, toward the rope, toward the families, toward the old man on the folding stool, and he spat in their direction in contempt, a wet, sneering arc of it onto the cobbles in front of 400 people who had done nothing but stand in the cold to see a procession. "Sheep," he said. "You're all sheep. You can insult a guardsman all morning. We are paid, in a manner of speaking, to be insulted. The contempt of fools is part of the uniform's weight. But that forecourt did not belong to me. It belonged to those 400 people and the city behind them, and a tradition older than any name on any list, and he had just spat on all of it on camera, while being escorted off ground he had no right to stand on." The crowd's sound changed again. Earlier it had been the nervous murmur of people watching a man misbehave. Now it was lower and harder, the sound of people who have decided. A few of them began, of all things, to clap, not for him, for the stewards, a slow rolling clap that ran down the rope line like a wave, and that I will hear, I think, for a long time, because there is nothing on this earth quite like the sound of ordinary people deciding together that they have had enough of a bully. And that was when the morning got away from him entirely, because the procession arrived. I felt it before I saw it. The cobbles took on the first faint drum of the household company stepping off under the clock tower, the cadence I have marched 10,000 times, and the great forecourt began to fill with the sound that the 400 had come for. The mounted escort came first, then the colors, then the slow gleaming river of the company in their own bearskins and brass, wheeling into the cleared ground in perfect order. The cleared ground that, 30 seconds earlier, this man had been standing in the middle of as if he owned it. He had not understood, you see, what the cordon was clearing the ground for. He thought front row meant a better view of a parade. He had never once let the obvious truth land, that the ground he had bullied his way onto was the ground 100 armed and mounted men were about to occupy, on a precise timetable, with a precision he had nearly fouled. If the stewards had been 3 seconds slower, if I had given him the argument he wanted instead of the silence and the single call, he would not have been a viral nuisance. He would have been a man standing in the path of the household cavalry at a state ceremony, and that is a category of problem the institution does not find funny in the slightest. He saw the horses then. I watch it hit him, the size of them, the number of them, the absolute indifference of them to his 100,000 followers, and the last of the performance fell off his face and left something I almost felt sorry for. Almost. He stopped pulling against the stewards. He let them walk him. He went the rest of the way to the rope quietly, a small man in a good coat being removed from a thing far larger and older than himself, and the crowd's slow clap followed him every step, and the phones followed the clap, and somewhere in that forest of black glass was the clip that would, by that afternoon, be watched more times than the procession it interrupted. I did not turn my head. I want that understood too. Through the whole of it, the finger on my brass, the spit, the clapping, the arrival of the company, I held the front, eyes level, heels on the line, and when the colors passed me, I gave them what I give the colors and have always given them, which is everything. That is the thing the camera never quite catches, and the thing I most want a man your age to take from this. The discipline was not me failing to react to him. The discipline was me having something better to do than react to him. He wanted to be the center of that forecourt. The whole point of the forecourt, of the rope, of the bearskin, of me, was that he was not and could not be, and that no list and no following and no shoved shoulder would ever make him so. They put him out through the gap in the rope. Beyond it, where the public ground began, 2 uniformed officers of the household police were already waiting, not summoned in a panic, simply there, the way the deeper rungs of the ladder are always already there if you have the eyes to see them. They took him from the stewards without ceremony. I heard distantly the flat official words begin, the ones about a restricted area, about a breach, about being detained, and I heard him start up again, the list, the followers, do you know who I am? But the words had no forecourt to fill anymore. They just leaked out into the ordinary street and died there. Then the procession swallowed the morning whole, the way it was always going to, and for the next 20 minutes I was simply a guardsman at a ceremony, and he was simply gone, and the 400 people who had earned their places along that rope got to see the thing they had stood in the cold for. The old man on the folding stool stood up for the colors. The 2 sisters who had taken the overnight coach held their phones up for the right reason now. A small boy near the front, the one whose place the guest had shouldered through at the very start of all this, sat up on his father's shoulders and watched the horses go by with his mouth open, and I thought, behind my unmoving face, that is what the rope is for, not to keep people out, to keep this in. I did not yet know what would happen to the guest after the gate. I did not know about the ban, or the statement, or the way his own words would be played back to him. A guardsman on his post rarely learns the end of the story he is the middle of. The river closes over the stone and moves on. But I knew the shape of it, because I had stood enough posts to know that the institution has a long, patient, entirely unhurried memory, and that the worst thing you can do to it is exactly what he had done, make it act in front of 400 witnesses, on the record, in defense of ordinary people. It does not forget that. It does not forgive it quickly, and it has resources for remembering that a man with 100,000 followers cannot begin to match. When the last rank had passed, and the forecourt settled back into its waiting hush, the duty corporal drifted back along the inside of the line and stopped a pace off my shoulder, the way he does when he has something to say that is not an order. "You all right?" Hans said, quiet, eyes front like mine. I gave him the smallest movement of my chin that the drill allows, which between 2 men who have stood a line together is a whole conversation. "He's having a worse morning than you," Hans murmured, and the corner of his mouth did a thing it is not supposed to do on post, and then he was gone back to his stanchion, and I was alone again with the rope and the brass and the painted line, exactly as I had begun. Which is the truth at the center of this, if you want it plainly. The man came to that barrier to change it, and he failed, and the barrier was still there when he was carried away, and so was I. What I did not yet know was how completely the world beyond the gate was about to finish the job. I learned the rest in pieces, the way a man on duty always does, from Hans, from the mess, from the duty officer's brief, and finally from the household's own public statement, which I read standing in the guardroom with my collar undone and a mug of tea going cold in my hand, and which I will carry to the end of my days as the most satisfying paragraph of plain language I have ever encountered. The first piece came within the hour. Clip me on the line, the finger on my brass, the spit toward the crowd, the slow clap. The horses had already left the forecourt and gone wherever those things go, and it had not gone the way the guest intended. He had wanted the world to see a guest of the house humiliated by a jumped-up doorman. The world saw something else entirely, a motionless guardsman, dignified to the point of stone, and a shrieking, finger-jabbing, spitting man being walked off a state ceremony he had bullied his way into. The internet, which is rarely on the side of the angels, was for once entirely on the side of the rope. By midday, the most shared frame was not of me at all. It was of the small boy on his father's shoulders watching the horses, with the guest a blur being carried out of the edge of the picture, and a caption I will not repeat but which made the point with some economy. The second piece was the list. He had said it 100 times, I'm on the list, I'm a guest of the house, and he had said it with such total conviction that I had half believed there was some clerk somewhere who had genuinely penciled him in. There was not. The household, which is meticulous about exactly this kind of thing precisely because men like him exist, checked. He was not on the founder's day list. He had never been on the founder's day list. What he had was an invitation to a wholly separate, far smaller commercial reception that one of the household's charitable trusts was hosting that evening, in a hall a mile away. An invitation he had been given as a courtesy, along with several hundred others, and which entitled him to a glass of wine and a canapé, and precisely no access to the morning's state procession whatsoever. He had read the word invitation, decided it meant everywhere, and shouldered an old woman's grandson out of the way on the strength of a canapé. When that detail came out, and it came out fast, because he had spent the morning shouting check the list at anyone who would listen, and a great many people checked, the last shred of his story died. He was not a wronged guest. He was a man who had crashed a ceremony he was never invited to, assaulted no one but laid hands on a guardsman, spat at the public, and demanded on camera to be let through a barrier protecting the path of 100 horses, all over a reception canapé he then never even attended, because by evening he had other problems. The third piece was the household statement, and this is the one I want to read to you nearly in full, because the institution does not raise its voice, and the rare times it does, it is worth hearing how. It did not name him. That was the first cruelty, and the cleanest. A man who lives on his name being pointedly not given his name is a particular kind of erasure. The statement said only that an individual had breached a secure ceremonial cordon at the Avonholt forecourt, had been calmly and lawfully removed by household staff, with the support of the public present, and that the guardsman on the post conducted himself throughout with exemplary discipline and restraint, exactly as the public is entitled to expect. Then came the line. The barriers at our ceremonies exist to protect the public, the participants, and the dignity of the occasion. They apply to everyone. There is no list that exempts a person from courtesy, and no invitation that confers the right to put hands on a guardsman or to treat the public with contempt. The individual concerned has been permanently withdrawn from all household and household trust events, and will not be admitted to any future occasion. Permanently withdrawn. No list that exempts a person from courtesy. I have read a great deal of official language in my years of service, most of it gray and toothless, and I tell you that paragraph had teeth. It did not insult him. It did something far worse. It simply stated, in the household's flat, unanswerable voice, that the rules he had spent his life buying his way around applied to him after all, in full, with no appeal. And it did it where his 100,000 followers and everyone else's could read it. The fourth piece was the followers, and this is the part I understand least and trust most, because I had nothing to do with it and could not have arranged it if I had tried. He had threatened me with them. 100,000 people who follow everything I do. You'll be the most hated man in the country by lunch. But a following is not loyalty. It is attention, and attention is a weather, and the weather had turned. The people who had followed him for his confidence did not enjoy watching that confidence shriek and spit and get walked off a forecourt by two calm men in dark coats. The brands he worked with, and a man like that lives on the brands he works with, read the same statement everyone else read, saw the word contempt aimed at ordinary families, and did the arithmetic that brands always do. By the end of that week, 2 of them had quietly ended their arrangements with him. By the end of the month, the number that had followed everything he did had begun, for the first time in his charmed life, to go the other way, and the comments beneath his apology, "There is always an apology, and it is always too late and about the wrong thing," were full of one phrase, repeated until it became almost a chant. "There's no list. There's no list. There's no list." He had taught them that phrase himself, by shouting the opposite of it at a man who would not move. I heard, too, what became of the small reception he had actually been invited to, the one with the canapes, the one a mile away, the one his whole morning's tantrum had been nominally about. He never went. By the evening he was in no condition to stand in a charity hall and smile, and in any case the trust that had hosted it, having read the same statement as everyone else, had quietly removed his name from its own door before the wine was poured. So the canapé he had shoved an old woman's grandson aside to reach, the seat he had ducked a rope and laid hands on a guardsman and spat at 400 people to claim. It turned out he was never going to taste any of it. He had burned down his hole standing for a thing he was already too disgraced to attend. There is a kind of justice that does not need a court, and it is simply this: a man chasing the wrong thing hard enough will run straight past the only thing he actually had. And there was the matter of the household police report, which I learned of only because I was named in it as the guardsman on the post and had to confirm a single dry line of fact. He was not charged with anything heavy. The household, true to itself, did not want a martyr, and a night's detention and a formal caution for the breach were enough. But the report existed. It was filed. It sat now in the same patient institutional memory I had thought about while he was jabbing his finger at my chest, and it would surface, quietly and at the worst possible moment, every time for the rest of his life that some new opportunity required a background check, a clearance, a credential, a pass to somewhere that mattered. He had wanted access more than anything in the world. He had in one morning manufactured for himself the one permanent fact most likely to be denied it. I did not celebrate any of it. I want to be honest about that, because the easy version of this story ends with the guardsman feeling vindicated, and that is not quite the shape of the thing inside me. What I felt mostly was the old quiet that comes after a thing has been done correctly, the same quiet I have felt after far heavier work in far harder places. Not triumph, settledness. The barrier had held. The boy had seen the horses. The old man had stood for the colors. The household had said in front of everyone that the rules are the rules and the public is to be respected, and it had been able to say so cleanly because a guardsman on a post had given it nothing to apologize for, no shove returned, no word thrown, no flinch sold, nothing the man could point to and cry, "See what they did to me." He had been left with only what he himself had done, and what he had done was enough. There is a thing my old sergeant used to say on the worst ground, when a young soldier was burning to answer some insult and pay it back with interest. He would put a hand on the boy's shoulder, not hard, and he would say, "Let him be his own punishment. Don't you become it." I did not understand him for years. I understood him completely, that Founder's Day morning, with a finger pressed against the brass of my tunic and 400 phones waiting for me to break. There is one more piece, and it came a few weeks later, and it is the reason I am telling you any of this at all, because the rest is just a loud man getting what loud men eventually get, and you can find 100 of those. I was on the same post. Founder's Day was long gone. It was an ordinary afternoon, gray and unremarkable, A thin crowd along the rope, no procession, just the standing. And a woman came up to the barrier with a boy on her hip, and she stopped in front of me, and she waited until there was a gap in the people, and then she said, very quietly, not expecting an answer because she knew the rules better than the guest ever had. "I don't know if you remember. He was the little one on his dad's shoulders. The man who pushed past him at the start." She shifted the boy higher. "We came back. He wanted to come back. He's been telling everyone at his school about the guard who didn't move." She smiled, and there was something careful in it, something that understood it was speaking to a wall and was speaking to it anyway. "I just wanted to say thank you, not for the horses, for the not moving." I am not permitted to answer. You know that by now. I kept my eyes at the front and my heels on the line, and I gave her nothing that a camera could have caught. But the boy on her hip was perhaps 5, and 5-year-olds do not know the rules, and he looked up at me from under the towering black of the bearskin with the total seriousness that only small children and old soldiers possess, and he raised one hand, very deliberately, in something that was almost a salute. A wobbling, earnest, badly formed little salute, learned, I would guess, from watching a man on his father's shoulders weeks before. And I will tell you what I did, because it is the only protocol I broke in this entire account, and I would break it again. I did not move my body. I did not turn my head or lower my rifle or do any of the things the guest had screamed and shoved and spat to make me do. But I let my eyes come down off the middle distance for the second time that month, slowly, just to the boy, just for the length of a single held breath, and I looked at him, and I let him see that I had seen him. That was all. A man like the guest could stand in front of me for an hour with all his followers and his list, and his contempt, and never earned that much. A child got it for free, for the price of an honest little hand raised in respect, because that is the whole secret of the rope and the brass, and the not moving that the guest never once came close to understanding. The discipline was never about keeping people out or keeping people down or being too proud to react. The discipline was about being worth the trust of the ones who never push, the old man on the stool, the sisters on the overnight coach, the boy on the shoulders. They do not shove the barrier. They do not duck the rope. They stand where they are asked to stand, and they trust that the man behind the brass will hold the line for them, against the weather and the crowd and every loud man who has ever mistaken a following for a right. The guest spent his whole morning trying to prove he was special enough to come through. The boy never tried, and so the boy got the only thing on that forecourt actually worth having, which was a guardsman's eyes coming down once to meet his. The guest, last I heard, is still apologizing. The household has not changed the statement and never will, and his name is still not on it, and that absence is the most permanent address he now owns. There's no list. He taught the whole country that phrase, and it will outlive everything else he ever did. I went back to the front. The woman moved the boy along the rope to where they could see the gate. The gray afternoon stood still around us. And I held the line, the same line, unchanged and unbroken. Exactly as I had begun the morning, he hit my shoulder and learned, too late and in front of everyone, that there is no line he gets to skip, and that the man who refuses to skip it, who holds it for the people who would never dream of crossing, is not the furniture of the ceremony at all. He is the reason it stands.